Hey everyone, it's JG, and today I'm going to do a deep dive into Pramanix Alter. Pramanix can be one of the hardest hitting casters in the game, which definitely makes her worthy of your attention. However, she also brings some very real practical weaknesses. To get the most out of her, you'll want to understand where she's great and where she's weaker. I'll be covering all her skills and talents, and some theory crafting around how to get the most out of her. Let's dive in. First, we have to talk about her weaknesses. Those weaknesses are all centered around the Phalanx Caster archetype. When their skills are inactive, Phalanx Casters do not attack. No matter which of her skills you bring, you're going to have to cope with some period of downtime where she's not attacking. And this generally means you need to be able to bring her to the field somewhat in advance of when you actually need her. She is mostly less reliable than you're used to a caster being, and takes a sizable investment of 24 DP to get onto the field. You need to be sure that all of the lanes on a map can be managed through her downtime if you're going to use her. In most content, I find this isn't a huge problem. You can bring enough Vanguard support to produce the DP you need. Many levels have a fairly slow start before they ramp up to harder enemies, so you have time to get her on the field and charge her up. And in most levels, if you fail, you can just retry with a different strategy or a different team. But there are a few places where I find her to be challenging. If Vanguards or DP are restricted, or you need to spread out your units across multiple lanes, it's a lot harder to find the breathing room to place her and give her time to charge up. Integrated strategies is particularly challenging here. I did an IS-6 run built around Pramanix, and while I did finish it, I would not recommend her in the future. You're not guaranteed to get Vanguard vouchers, and there are many levels where you just don't have room to cope with her downtime. A single failed level means a failed run, so operators who aren't predictable are a liability. Now, the Phalanx Caster trait also comes with some perks. In between skills, she gains 20 res and 200% defense, so she comes onto the map with almost 1000 defense and 35 res. If you also have Silver Ash Alter, the 60 to 120 bonus defense he grants comes before the 200% bonus, meaning she can have in excess of 1300 defense, which is like a good defender during their skill. You can use this to bait ranged physical attacks like artillery, and she'll even inflict cold or freeze on her attackers with her second talent. Her first talent, Unending Snows, is her signature. All three of her skills modify it in some way, but let's cover exactly how it works. Every few seconds, she causes snow to accumulate on tiles within her range. Snow can stack up to 5 times, and the graphic will change to show how thick it is. Normally, snow only accumulates on ground tiles, but on levels like this one, where ground enemies can run through high ground tiles, the snow will accumulate there too. When enemies enter a tile with snow, they will take arts damage, up to 100% of her attack with her module. When they exit a tile with snow, all stacks of snow on that tile disappear, regardless of how thick the snow was. Enemies also lose movement speed in snow, 12% per stack, so up to 60% reduced speed in deep snow. This is the only place where the snow's depth matters. Deep snow doesn't deal more damage, it just slows units more. Let's talk about all the edge cases. First off, if units die while in the snow, including dying from taking damage from the snow, that won't remove the snow. Snow can accumulate on all ground tiles, whether or not they're deployable. This includes under the incursion and objective points. Units will trigger the damage from snow on an objective point before they enter the objective point, so you have a chance to kill them there before they leave. Aerial units ignore all the effects of snow. That includes hovering units, but if a hovering unit lands in a snow tile, they'll immediately take snow damage. Similarly, units who spawn on a snowy tile will take damage immediately. If a tile is clear of snow and accumulates snow while a unit is in it, they'll take damage immediately. But if snow keeps falling on a unit while they're already standing in snow, they won't take any more damage. Invisible units are immune to snow. If they become visible while standing in snow, they won't take any damage until they enter a new tile. Blocked units won't enter the blocker's tile normally and won't trigger snow from that tile. All snow disappears immediately if Pramanix leaves the field. So, how good is it? Since it deals 100% of attack as arts damage, the initial analysis would say that if you can trigger Snowfall damage at the same speed that a core caster can make attacks, then Pramanix basically doesn't have downtime. She can put out as much arts damage in between skills as a regular caster can, and then has awesome damage during her skills. I did a side-by-side here on a level with a nice single lane, and the result is pretty interesting. In the time it takes them to kill the first few waves, Aya pulls off 29 attacks, and Pramanix triggers snow damage 28 times. They're basically the same. Between skills, Pramanix is a core caster that can't hit aerial enemies. But while I was searching for a good level for that comparison, I also tried this one, and it's a great illustration of the strengths and weaknesses here. This Shield Guard leader comes through and takes a long time to kill. Pramanix only triggers damage on him once. Aya hits him for a whole minute, and eventually drops him. Ironically, Aya is then dropped by a Mortar Gorilla, while Pramanix completely shrugs him off due to her ridiculous defense. Across the same amount of time on map, Aya dealt 2x the arts damage. The real takeaway here is that Snow works great when there are a lot of weak, fast-moving mobs. Tough, slow-moving targets get blocked in place and take 0 damage while Snow falls around them. And this is exactly the sort of enemy where you'd like some extra support from your casters. Being good at killing trash mobs is not a particularly interesting strength either. Lots of units can kill weak enemies. Where Snowfall ends up being valuable is that it lets you save your skills for the enemies that matter. It doesn't work well against big enemies, but big enemies are where you pop her skills instead. Snowfall can do a lot to reduce the Phalanx Caster weaknesses in between those skills. The other nice tactical benefit of Snow is the move speed reduction. Pramanix passively provides a lot of the benefits of a decel binder. Slow isn't useful all that often, but it can make a huge difference against enemies like Sarkaz Lancers, since their damage scales with velocity. The Snow can catch fast-moving Lancers that are sometimes going so fast that decel binders can't even hit them before they hit you. One final perk of Snowfall is that it's completely independent of attack speed. If attack speed is heavily debuffed, or Pramanix is stunned or otherwise disabled, the Snowfall continues operating at full efficiency. Pramanix's second talent unlocks at Elite 2. It inflicts cold on any units who attack her, and also revives her the first time she takes lethal damage. As with her Snow, the cold does not trigger against invisible enemies. In most circumstances, this is just a small passive debuff against anybody who attacks her, but it's exceptional in a few key places. Attackers who hit twice or deal continuous damage over time will turn that cold into a freeze. She trivializes Sarkaz casters or Sarkaz guitarists, who can otherwise be problematic enemies. The revive effect is the sort of perk you hope you don't have to rely on, but gives her a deeper HP pool for tough maps. That covers her trait and talents. Now it's time for her skills. This is a good point to remind you to like and subscribe if you enjoy this level of analysis, so I can keep doing more of these. Let's start with the one everybody is talking about, and that's her S2. S2 has an infinite duration. She starts dealing 380% arts damage on every hit to all enemies in her range. Then it modifies her Snow. It can expand beyond her starting range, and it can even freeze the objective point. Anybody on a Snow tile starts taking arts damage every second, and receives cold when they leave a Snow tile. There's a lot here, so let's take it piece by piece. First off, there's the AoE damage and infinite duration. This clause by itself makes it a strong contender for the best caster skill in the game. It's an AFK skill that can tackle a bunch of enemies with no further thought. It deals more damage than almost every other AFK or auto skill from casters. Lapland barely squeaks past her, but has to attack the same target continuously for 9 seconds before she hits that level of damage, and resets to much lower damage when she kills an enemy and switches targets. And these DPS numbers I'm displaying, I'm measuring single target damage. Pramanix hits all enemies in her range for that same level of damage. Ifrit is the only one on this list who hits all targets, and she has a much narrower range. Aya deals just a little bit of splash damage. Logos also has an instant kill clause on his skill that's a bit hard to adjust for, but where it really excels is in clearing trash mobs. Between full AoE damage and her Snowfall, Pramanix has no trouble matching him on that front. As an infinite skill, this also erases the weaknesses of Phalanx Casters once it activates. She has no more downtime. At full mastery, it takes 45 seconds to charge, after which she'll have the highest consistent damage output of any caster for the whole rest of the level. On top of all that, we have the Snowfall effects. Her Snow starts dealing damage over time, so blocked enemies standing in Snow no longer get a free ride. The Snow starts to spread outside her attack range. When she adds a layer of Snow, if any of those tiles is already at 5 stacks of Snow, it will instead add a stack to the 4 surrounding tiles. If those tiles are also full, they'll also overflow, so the Snow keeps spreading. A tile can get overflow stacks from 2 sources at once. For instance, here we see a tile jump straight to depth 2 in 1 tick. If 5 stacks accumulate on the objective point, it freezes over. The frozen objective point has 3500 HP, block 3, and 800 defense. Those core stats are comparable to Hoshiguma with no skills. Much like Hoshiguma, it can't block aerial enemies. It can't be directly healed, but passive regen auras like Perfumers can heal it. If it gets destroyed, it can freeze over again if it accumulates another 5 stacks of snow. This effect is kind of neat, but I haven't yet found a situation where it's all that necessary. It would be interesting in single operator levels like face-off nodes and integrated strategies, if not for the fact that it takes a whole minute to get rolling. You might use it in a challenge mode or contingency contract where ground units are heavily debuffed. Most of the time, I'd advise putting Pramanix where she'll deal the most damage, not where she'll block objectives. Finally, the snow starts to inflict cold. For enemies that move fast enough, this effect can escalate to a freeze. I estimate her snow as adding about 20% to the skill's already high damage output. This skill can be deactivated, but the only reason you'd want to is to put her back into high defense mode. When deactivated, any snow outside her range stays there, and any frozen objectives stay frozen. They just won't replenish until her skill reactivates. Overall, this skill is just insane. It's particularly amazing in very long levels like Annihilation missions where they start slow, but she can operate in infinite mode for a very long time. She can practically solo a lot of Annihilation missions, or at least solo one of the lanes. This should be your default skill on Pramanix. Despite all that, it's not without weaknesses. You have to be able to cope with the 45-second charge-up time, during which she won't deal any damage except through Snowfall. The more I play with her, the more I realize that 45 seconds is not that long. Tons of levels are barely going by the time her skill activates, and she tends to trivialize the level once her skill is up. You really want to avoid anything that resets her skill, because charging it again is painful. Forced redeploys like the avalanches from her event reset her, and of course getting killed and redeployed puts a huge dent in her output. And finally, it doesn't have any res ignore, so this skill does not work very well against high res enemies. Now, with as great as her S2N, you'd think surely there's no reason to talk about her other skills, but S3 is actually another very useful option. It bumps up her range, her attack speed, and the rate of her snowfall. It ignores 10 res, and it hits very hard. Its direct damage is almost 80% higher than S2 when it's on. The res ignore will add a bit more on top of that, maybe 15 to 25% against tough enemies, and far more when res is very high. It bursts much higher, but when you wait by uptime, it's around 20% lower than S2. S3 can also be ready to go as soon as 8 seconds after deployment. S2 is your easy AFK skill for ordinary levels, but S3 is a boss killer, or a hella drop-ish nuke. Where does this one stack up among other nuking skills? I usually score nukers against targets with A-rank defense and res. If you measure total potential damage against multiple targets, I count her as top 3 in the game. Moinar, of course, is a legendary nuker, and Mantra can shred a dense cluster of enemies. Pramanix is the next best at this, with about 2x the total damage of the next closest still on my list. That's pretty great. However, if you flip the chart to look at damage per target instead of total damage, the list changes substantially. Moinar and Mantra are still very high, but single-target nukers like Sakiko, Lemoen, and Exuziate Altar are also way above Pramanix. Pramanix eclipses some strong units like Logos, Ea, and Wishadel. She's on the top 10 list of boss nukers, but not at the top of it. What this means is that she's great if you have a big boss surrounded by big minions and you want them all to die. But if it's just the boss you're focused on, she's good, but there are more meta choices. There's also one more strength and one more weakness worth flagging. The weakness is the range. A 21 tile range is a pretty big area for a skill, but this range is centered on Pramanix. It only extends 2 tiles in front of her. Mantra or Logos have 18 tile areas, but it's all focused in front of them. It's rare to find an island to place Pramanix with enemies on every side. A frontal area is usually better for hitting targets that matter. The lure mechanic is the last perk that deserves a little extra discussion. This is just the second skill in the game to have lure, after Tragedia's S2. Tragedia has shown what an amazing mechanic it is for stalling bosses, even if they're ordinarily unblockable. Pramanix lures nearby enemies towards the 4 tiles adjacent to her, if they're reachable. The increased snowfall will decrease their movement speed as they try to escape. This helps her hold enemies within range of her damage for longer, and can also hold them in range of other nukers that you aim towards the same location. So S3 bursts higher, is ready sooner, ignores a bit of res, and can lure enemies, but has the periodic downtime that's a signature of Phalanx Casters. It's a little more situational than S2, but definitely has its place. Finally, we have S1. It's rare for a unit to have 3 skills that are worth using, and Pramanix is no exception. There are just a few places where I can imagine it's useful. S1 is an instantaneous skill that deals 1 instance of damage and a moderate push. Then it spreads snow in the direction that she's facing. Starting from any tile within range that has snow on it, that snow propagates forward, up to 5 tiles. However deep the starting tile was is how deep it is when it spreads, so you can get different depths on different lanes. The snow stops propagating if it hits a high ground or impassable tile. This skill's DPS is around 20% of S2's. You just get 1 big attack every 12 seconds. DPS is never the reason to use this skill. I can come up with 2 situations where it might be viable. Number 1 is to maximize her defense. The skill animation only lasts 2 seconds, and outside of that, she'll have the giant defense and res bonus. So for example, you can use this to bait artillery fire, and then take pot shots at them in between their slow attacks. Number 2 is that S1 is the fastest way to spread deep snow all over the map. She can coat like 30 tiles with minus 60% move speed reduction and refresh it really quickly. Most of the time, I'd rather have damage than speed reduction, but if you need wide range speed reduction, consider S1. Now let's talk her module. Level 1 gives a 3% damage bonus per enemy within range, up to 5 stacks. Things don't live long when they're close to her, but it's a decent perk. It also adds about 5% to her base attack. Level 2 makes her snow accumulate 10% faster, and deal 20% more damage. Level 3 adds another 11% snow damage, and makes her throw down a first layer immediately on deploy. There are no transformational breakpoints in this one. It gives modest bonuses across the board. It boosts snow damage by a sizable 33%, but snow damage is so weak compared to her skills that it's not a reason to prioritize this module in my opinion. This will help you to max her, but it's not a must-have. Let's close by looking at Masteries for Pramanix. S1 is super situational, and all it really gains is 10% damage. Never master this. S2 is definitely her signature skill. It only gains 2 things: more damage, about 10% again, and the first activation time will decrease by 7 seconds, from 52 to 45 seconds. Less downtime is better, but if you can bear 45 seconds without her skill, you can probably bear 52 seconds also. You might want to master this if you're using her constantly, but it's not essential. S3 is a different story. Her attack stat and damage multiplier both grow, resulting in a 45% damage boost. Without Masteries, it barely deals more damage per hit than S2. First activation improves by 10 seconds, from 18 down to 8, and uptime grows very slightly. S3 definitely gets way better with Mastery, but it's not something you'll use as much as S2. If you plan to use her as part of your boss kill strategy, this one is worth the investment. That's all for today. Let me know in the comments any extra strategies or synergies that you think are worth discussion. Please like and subscribe for more like this. See you next time.